Hello, welcome to the program. My name is Sam Ankerson. I'm the director of the Bailey Matthews National Shell Museum, and we are very glad that you've joined for this program, whether it's night or afternoon or morning, wherever you are, exploring the oceans for public television with Alexa Elliott. And look forward to introducing Alexa in a few moments. She is the creator and longtime producer of Changing Seas, which is a superb and long-running program on PBS in which she and her cohorts travel the world to explore our oceans and life within them, and to explore the mysteries of Earth's last frontier. And she's doing it a long time, has had some great experiences, and you're going to hear about them. And here at the museum, we met Alexa last summer as she and her crew were filming for a new episode on mollusks, which, among other things, features our own science director and curator, Dr. Jose Leal. And we're so excited that this program is taking a deep dive, no pun intended, on the subject of mollusks, and she'll be talking more about that in her presentation, and it's I believe scheduled to air this coming June. Before we introduce Alexa and begin her presentation, as we have with our online lecture series since November, would just like to give a quick update on the museum and post Hurricane Ian steps and efforts. It's maybe particularly poignant for this program, as actually we're coming right up in a couple days on the 6-month anniversary, or if that's the right word for it, of the storm. Thought I'd start with a couple of notes on the general area. I know there are a number of people on this program who aren't here in the area and other parts of the country. And generally speaking, 6 months later, there are more and more signs, encouraging signs all the time of recovery and of progress. This image on the right is of the Sanibel Lighthouse, which now has its leg repaired. You can see that on the right, and there was a relighting of the lighthouse that took place several weeks ago. There are big challenges for wildlife on the islands, but wildlife is returning. And on the left, we see the beloved white pelicans who come to spend the winters in the area. They're here. They're at Ding Darling and elsewhere, and all the time. It's nice to see these increasing signs of moving forward. There are over 50 businesses now open on the islands, probably more than that, and they include several cherished restaurants like Doc Ford's and Traders and others, and more are opening all the time. Most of the beaches are open, and there's not a real hard figure on how many people are living on the islands again, but general estimates seem to be around maybe 1,500, 2,000. So these are all good signs. There's still a long way to go for those who are here. They'll identify with us that everywhere seems to be in a place somewhere between, everything's sort of gutted out and cleaned at this point, and what's happening now is re-roofing and demolition of those structures that are being demolished for one reason or another. Not a whole lot of reconstruction happening yet. Of course, that's to come, but it illustrates that that along with signs of progress, this is a multi-year journey that we're on. And from an ecological point of view, the very recent news is the challenging red tide conditions that we've been experiencing have lessened this week, which is great. But that red tide is something that was expected after a major event like a hurricane. It just flushes out flushes out the estuaries and the watershed and brings everything into the bay and into the ocean, which exacerbates the red tide. So we're glad it's not here now. It was here in force recently, and likely, we'll see it again as we head into the summer months. But that's another part of life as we move forward. On the museum front, and here you have an image on the right of the Great Hall, with its ceiling and walls gutted. And the good news for the museum is that we've just recently been received approval on permits to begin reconstruction. So we're cleared to begin the rebuilding process. And for those on this program who just don't know, the quick summary of the museum's hurricane damage is we sustained heavy water and structural damage throughout all 3 levels of the museum. But we're going to start the repairs soon. It's going to be a phased process where we take care of the roof first, and then focus on the ground level where the aquariums are, and then go up from there. Our goal is to of course repair, but also to make improvements to the permanent exhibits where we can, so that at the end of the day, when we come back, it's an even better Bailey Matthews Shell Museum than it was before. And we don't have a timeline for this that is based on a schedule from our contractors, but our goal is for the ground level, the aquarium level, to be reopened to the public perhaps around November 1st, and the rest of the museum sometime after that, hopefully by this time next year. As I said, that's a goal. It's not yet informed by a quote real schedule, but it seems within the realm of possibility, and that's what we're going to be working towards. The aquariums, the living gallery, will, as far as the marine life that's exhibited there, the species that are exhibited there, that will be very much as everyone remembers who saw it before. So it was successful, and we're looking forward to replicating that again. So, we're looking at something like a 6, 12, 14-month time frame, and cost estimates is something approaching $3 million for everything related to this. With all that said, we on February 1st, the museum reopened in a limited, temporary kind of way, and here are a couple images of the experience of visiting the museum. There are 3 things that are available to visitors when they come now. The Great Hall, right, that while battered, the exhibits there are intact and viewable. And then we have on the left something called a Shell and Tell experience, where collection volunteers chat with visitors with a group of shells from around the world. And on the right, you see scenes of a quite powerful photography exhibit we have of photographs from community members of the storm and its aftermath. And it's an exhibit that people are submitting photographs all the time. It's growing all the time, and it's an amazing kind of community record. So encourage you to, if you're in the area, to come visit and bring friends. We're open Tuesday through Friday, 11 to 3. Admission is free, and we don't know how long we're going to be staying open in this way. Once reconstruction really kicks into gear, we'll need to close again, but we hope you'll stop by. We have a couple more lectures coming up in our spring series that we hope you'll consider joining. Pete Malinowski of the Billion Oyster Project in New York City is on April 20th. This is an incredible oyster restoration quest, in which the goal is to restore oysters in in a sustainable and robust way to New York City Harbor and up the Hudson River and elsewhere around New York. And then on May 17th, Jose Leal will give us a great talk on micromollusks. You can sign up for these programs. They're free on our website under education and then lectures. And which reminds me that all Zoom programs that we do are recorded and are available for viewing anytime down the line through our website. And so, and this program, it takes us a few days to get it uploaded, but this will be available in a few days. For tonight's program, if you have questions, please use the chat function, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the end, and we'll take your questions. So just type them in on the chat function. So with that, it's now my pleasure to introduce Alexa. Alexa Elliott has worked in public broadcasting since 1996. Both in public radio as well as television production. She's produced TV programs of various genres, but nature, science, and environmental programming have always been her favorite. Changing Seas is now in its 15th season. Alexa has received numerous awards for her work, including the prestigious Communication Award presented by the National Academy of Sciences, 11 Emmy Awards, and others. And Alexa, thank you very much for being with us for this program, and take it away. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so great to be here with all of you, and it's so wonderful to see the museum being open again. That's just absolutely wonderful to see. Let me go ahead and share my screen real quick before I start. Give me just a second. Okay, hopefully you're all able to see that slide. So as Sam mentioned, my name is Alexa Elliott, and I am the Senior Manager of Science and Environmental Content at South Florida PBS. And we're on the state's East Coast. South Florida PBS is actually made up of two PBS stations, WPBT, which primarily broadcasts in Monroe, Miami-Dade, and Broward counties, and then also WXEL, which reaches the Palm Beaches. And back in October of 2015, the two stations merged to form South Florida PBS. And as such, we're actually now the largest public media company in the state of Florida. And we reach approximately 6.3 million viewers, and that's all the way from Key West up to the Sebastian Inlet along the Atlantic coast, for those of you who aren't living in Florida, and then west about halfway to the center of the state to Lake Okeechobee. As Sam mentioned, I have 2 degrees in broadcast journalism, just to give you a little bit of background about myself. I have a bachelor's from Morehead State University, which is in Kentucky, and then a master's degree from the University of Florida. And I've worked in public media since college, basically, both as a radio news reporter, but also working on long format television productions. And I kind of made my way around the state since moving to Florida. When I was in graduate school, I worked at WUFT, which is the stations at the University of Florida in Gainesville. After graduation, I moved to Fort Myers and worked at WGCU for a while, which is the station that is actually airing on Sanibel and the surrounding areas. And then back in 2006, I was hired by WPBT in Miami to work on a nature series called Wild Florida. And Wild Florida was a series hosted by Hunter Reno, and it was all about Florida's native animals and habitats. And this was kind of a dream job come true for me. It's, you know, as Sam mentioned earlier, nature has always been kind of my favorite subject matter. So that was a lot of fun to work on. But then around 2007, as the funding for that particular program started winding down, my then boss, our vice president of production at the time, came to me and said, listen, I need you to come up with a proposal for a new TV series that can last for 3 years with 4 episodes a year. And that's kind of how Changing Seas got started. So what is changing seas? Well, when we were working on the Wild Florida series, we had the opportunity to meet experts who are doing ocean research, or we were filming maybe sharks or turtles, you name it. And one trip in particular that we got to do was we were able to join the National Park Service scientists team to go out to Dry Tortugas National Park for 5 days on their research vessel. And we were filming them as they were documenting the health of the coral reefs out there. And it really intrigued me, and it made me realize just how much work is happening along our coastlines. And I also thought, well, we have the ability to film underwater. We were all scuba divers. We love to scuba dive on our team. And we had the housings that you need to put the cameras in to film underwater. So it seemed sort of like a natural evolution to maybe do a show on marine science. Now, you might be wondering, well, why do a show on the oceans, right? So a few years prior to me writing that proposal, there were actually 2 separate ocean commissions. Some of you might remember this, the Pew Oceans Commission and the U.S. Commission on Ocean Policy. And they both released their final reports on the state of the oceans. They had been working on this for years, and there really hadn't been an update. I think it was maybe going all the way back to the 1970s. And so while previously it was kind of thought that, yeah, humans were making an impact on land, but maybe not so much in the oceans because they're so vast and, there's dilution and all that. Once these reports came out, it was pretty obvious that humans were indeed having a pretty serious impact on ocean ecosystems, anything from pollution, overfishing, climate change, you name it. We were making or having a negative impact on our oceans. And there really wasn't a lot of coverage on these topics on broadcast television back then. So knowing what these reports had found, and then also knowing that, we're uniquely positioned in the state of Florida with so much cutting edge marine science happening all around us, right? We have researchers in academia, the state and federal agencies that do a ton of work here, private research institutions, nonprofits. I mean, there's just such a wealth of knowledge right here in Florida that it really made sense to maybe focus on how these experts do their work. And one of the things I also thought was really important to do was to try to maybe challenge some of these stereotypes that people might have about science, that this is some boring stuff that happens in some dusty lab somewhere. You couldn't be further from the truth when it comes to marine science because, it's often very adventurous. People are out there on boats in rough seas, or they're scuba diving with big sharks and things like that. So that was another thing we wanted to do in addition to really highlighting how scientists do their work and how they know what they know is just the challenges that our oceans are facing and how science knows about that. That was sort of the idea behind the series. So, of course, public television being a nonprofit, we can't do any of our programs without funding upfront. And we have been so tremendously fortunate that the Batchelor Foundation, which funded the Wild Florida series, also decided to come on board for a 3-year funding cycle to fund Changing Seas. And they have been just absolutely tremendous. They're our primary funder, and they have funded us or have come back in 3-year increments 5 times since then. So without them, this series wouldn't exist because we really need to, to be able to pay for the production costs, we need grant funding up front. Now, throughout the years, we've also had other funders come on board, whether it's other foundations or private donors or in some cases businesses. And so currently we have additional funding from Trish and Dan Bell, as well as the Perot Family Endowment for Environmental Education. So basically, once we knew we had funding in place, we were able to start production. That was back in the fall of 2008. And these are some pictures from our very first season. And it's funny for me to look at them now because we're all a lot younger. The cameras have changed quite a bit since then. But our very first episode was actually on the Goliath grouper. Those of you who live in Florida or maybe spend a lot of time here, I'm sure are familiar with some of the issues surrounding the grouper. And it's very interesting looking back now, 15 years since that, while the science has certainly advanced, the issues surrounding the group are still relevant today. And it's nice to see that with quite a few of the episodes that we've covered over the years. So as I mentioned, we do 4 half-hour episodes every year. They all cover anything from ocean exploration to conservation and research. And our new episodes always premiere in the Miami market towards the middle and end of each June. So just to kind of sum up a little bit about give you a couple of quick facts about the series. So we've been on the air since 2009, and we have had 56 episodes or 14 seasons to date. And they have aired on 95% of PBS stations, including every state in the country, which is exciting. We have also been in 39 foreign countries, and we have filmed in 15 countries, 9 states, and 2 territories since then. And we currently have funding for 3 more seasons. And I actually have a short video to play for you. And give me just a second. I just realized before I play that for you, I need to reshare my screen one more time. Bear with me. I forgot to select a setting that is important before I do this. Sorry about that. Okay, let's do this again. There we go. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. So let's try this again. So given that obviously we're a TV show, I think it makes the most sense to just show you a short video about what the series is all about.
Earth is a blue planet, covering more than 70% of its surface. The oceans are vital to our existence. But human activities seriously threaten the age-old balance of the sea. Climate change, pollution, overfishing. These are just some of the issues pushing this liquid wilderness to the brink. Since 2009, Changing Seas has explored these threats, showcasing the hidden and fragile world beneath the waves. Join South Florida PBS on an inspiring journey away from shore. Meet the experts who dive below the water's surface to explore the mysteries of the deep and learn about the complex threats to this incredible environment. Venture with us into the blue.
Now, hopefully you were able to both see and hear that smoothly. Sometimes I can stutter a little bit when we do these virtual events, but anyway, as you can imagine, when we, with 56 episodes to date, we've covered a ton of different topics, and they range from everything like what you might expect, the large megafauna, like humpback whales and sharks and manatees, to things such as, marine microbes and the ocean carbon cycle. So, and we don't just cover marine biology, we also have done episodes on chemical and physical oceanography. And over the years, we've been able to film from anywhere as deep as 2,000 feet below the surface in a submersible in Honduras to, as shallow as ankle deep near shore. I mean, we've really covered all different ranges of ocean habitats. And we started originally filming in the state of Florida, but obviously it became kind of obvious that, the oceans don't stop at the state line. And a lot of the issues that we're seeing in Florida, obviously also impacting the Caribbean and the Bahamas. So we slowly expanded into that area. And then from there kind of reached out into Central America. And since then, it's been really exciting. We've filmed several episodes in the Pacific, 2 of them in the South Pacific. We've been to Hawaii several times, South America, Alaska. And then most recently, we finally filmed our first episode in the polar regions, which was very exciting for me. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a little bit. But so when we're filming, you know, some episodes might involve diving, but certainly not all. There are times when we might be out on a research vessel with scientists for a week to 10 days and just focusing on one particular research project. Or other times we might be working on topics that lend themselves to better be told by featuring multiple experts who are all working on that same topic. So it really just depends on whatever the individual episode is about. Now, to give you a little bit of an idea of how this all works, right? So behind the scenes. So theoretically, with 4 episodes a year, that would mean 3 months per episode. But it's not this neat thing where we finish one and then do the next and so forth and so on. You really constantly have like 1 episode in pre-production, 1 episode in post-production. You know, they have to overlap just to make it all work because some come together very quickly. Others we need to plan years in advance. So, and what a producer does, like myself. So the first thing, of course, is try to figure out a topic, right? And in the early years, it was mostly based on me doing research, you know, looking at what was in the news, reaching out to universities and so forth. But over the years, what's been really fun and really nice, the more scientists we work with, the more of them, you know, tell us, you know what, you know, you should really look at this really cool project my colleague has that might be of interest. And so we've kind of been able to cover a lot of topics in recent years based on just recommendations within the scientific community, which has been super fun. So once we choose a topic that works for us, both from a budget point of view, but also in terms of when we can film it, like, because, you know, obviously we have to make sure, does the time the science happen coincide with when I have a film crew available? Does it work with our deadlines? All those things, right? So once that's all figured out, we as producers have to do a ton of research. I usually ask the scientists we work with to share research papers in advance, and I read a lot of that. I've read a few PhD dissertations over the years, and that's really just to prepare myself for the interviews, right? But also before we can go out in the field and start filming, we need to make sure there's, you know, all the boring stuff is done, like getting film permits. You know, if we're traveling overseas, sometimes we need visas. Sometimes we always need a customs clearance for our camera gear, right? So if you bring thousands of dollars worth of camera gear, you need to have import-export documentation in place so that you're not charged duty when you're at the border somewhere. So those are all the logistics that are not so fun that are done upfront. But then once we actually get into the field, we have between 10 and 15 days, depending on the episode, to film with the experts. And that's when we film all of our footage, we do our interviews. And that's, of course, the funnest part, right, of our job. That's what we all love the most. And as you can see in those pictures there, that's our crew out in the field for different episodes. Once we are done with filming and we get back home, it's time to go through all of the interviews, and our production assistant will transcribe all the interviews. We used to have to do that by hand. That was very, very tedious because these interviews tend to be an hour to an hour and a half long. Luckily, nowadays, there is software available that can do that for you, and you just have to proofread it. The producer will go through all of the raw footage we filmed. So to give you an idea, like for a half-hour episode, you need about 30 to 40 hours worth of material that you have filmed to have enough stuff to work with. And even then, we still always need to get more stuff in the edit room. Once I have all the transcripts, the producer is also in charge of writing the script. So then I'll sit down and work my way through it, write a script, and kind of get that to a place where I can hand it over to our editor, who you see in the pictures here. That's our editor and director of photography, Sean Hickey, who's been with the series since the beginning. And then he's really the one who brings this whole thing to life, right? You can write the best script in the world, but without the visuals, you don't have a TV show. So, so once he gets it, he really does his magic, and he lays in the footage where it needs to go, adds the music, things like that. And before we record with our professional narrator, that comes later in the process. So when we first start editing, any pieces that are narration, I'll record, and they're sort of like we call that a scratch track. That's a placeholder just to make sure that the show is in the right, time amount that it needs to be. So given that this is for broadcast, each episode actually has to be exactly 26 minutes and 42 seconds down to the frame. So we really need to get the timing right before it ever even goes to our narrator, so it doesn't end up being over. And so while Sean does his magic in the edit room, I go back to the scientists, myself or any of our other producers that we have working for us, go back to the science team to just fact check, right? Everything that we've put in the script to make sure that we didn't misinterpret anything they may have said or otherwise gotten things wrong, because we want to, of course, make sure everything's scientifically accurate. Now, while all that happens in the edit room and I'm fact checking, we also have our animator, Norman Silva, who you see in those photos there, busy working on our animations. So, sometimes we may not have been able to film certain processes, or maybe these are things that you can't film, you want to just visualize a scientific concept. And that's really where Norman comes in. He's incredibly talented, and he uses a software called Maya, which allows him to build 3D animations. Just to give you an example, I had actually hoped to share one of these with you from our upcoming mollusk program. Norman has been working very closely with Dr. Jose Leal and Dr. Rudiger Bieler on creating one of these animations of a lightning whelk actually laying her egg casings. But he set it off to render last Friday, and it takes such tremendous computing power. It's still crunching. It's still coming together. So unfortunately, we didn't have that ready for you today, but you'll certainly be able to see that come June when the program comes out. So once the graphics are in, the music's there, the narrator has recorded, once we get everything the way we want it to be, which takes about 4 weeks, that's when we do our final in-house approvals. We have engineers look at it to make sure that everything is okay from a technical standpoint before it can air. And then, of course, we do closed captioning before it goes out onto the air. And since we're doing 4 of these throughout the year, we'll always get some done earlier that are put on the shelf until it's time for the season premiere. So while we premiere the new episodes every June, we do keep airing these year round. And like I mentioned, they air on PBS stations across the country. Here in the South Florida market, we air them Mondays and Tuesdays, in the Palm Beaches, Wednesdays, in the rest of South Florida. But if you're interested in checking them out, the best thing is really to do is to check your local listings, because we don't necessarily know when stations put them on the air. But we do have all of our episodes available for free as well on our YouTube channel, which is at Changing Seas TV, as well as on our website. You can watch all the old episodes at changingseas.tv. Now, in addition to working on the programs, we also do a lot of community outreach as well. So prior to the pandemic, we did about 30 community events a year. We had 2 regular community events that were very popular. One was the Summer Dive-In Film Series that was at Nova Southeastern University in Dania Beach here on the East Coast. And what we would do is we, over the summer, host screenings of each of the new episodes, followed by an expert panel and a small reception. And we had a similar type of program throughout the year in South Miami-Dade County at the Deering Estate, which was also very popular, and a great way for our audience to meet the scientists directly and ask questions, which is always really nice, because, when you only have 26 minutes, there is a lot that you end up not being able to put into the program, and this is an opportunity for people to learn more. Once COVID hit, of course, we pivoted like everyone else to virtual type programming, and we hosted a ton of different screenings and experts panels on our Facebook page and on our YouTube channel to keep the engagement going. But yeah, so now we're slowly starting to get back to in-person programming. We have a very active social media feed. So if you're on social media, please check us out at Changing Seas, where we try to provide content that's not available, you know, as part of the program. So there's a lot of extra content that's out there, and we try to keep in touch with our audiences that way. And as Sam mentioned earlier, it's been really rewarding being recognized by our peers. The series has won 14 Emmy Awards over the last 15 years, and we've been featured in numerous film festivals, received some awards from film festivals. And then the award that I'm most proud of was back in 2011 when our episode on legacy contaminants in bottlenose dolphins won an award from the National Academy of Sciences. Now, I'm sure you're probably wondering, okay, well, tell us about what's coming up this coming June. And we're actually right now, we're done filming, but we're super busy in the edit room, putting all these programs together. And I'm really excited. We have a very diverse range of topics coming up. We're going to have one episode on a very unique shark research project that Mote Marine Laboratory is doing in Belize. And in this particular project, they're working very closely with shark fishermen who catch sharks for their meat. And together they're collecting data. They're able to engage these fishermen to help them collect data. And they also collaborate on conservation efforts, which is a really unique approach to shark science, because they're taking the locals into consideration. You know, they're, you know, realizing that they need to feed their families, make a living, but also figuring out a way of how they can partner to enhance conservation measures. This episode was produced by my colleague, Liz Smith, and Liz is also working on another episode that was filmed last fall. This is a program that was filmed in Bermuda, and it is looking at how the archipelago has or is already seeing climate change impacts now, and how local experts are trying to shore up their resiliency through coral restoration efforts and other initiatives to really try to prepare that island nation to be ready for what's to come in future years. Because, you know, they're seeing through, just like we do in Florida with king tides and such, they're seeing increased flooding events and such already. So, you know, they're trying to be as proactive as possible when it comes to climate change. And then I mentioned earlier that we finally were able to go to the polar regions. So this winter, we traveled to Svalbard in northern Norway in the high Arctic, where we were able to film our first ever episode in very, very cold weather at the northernmost research station in the world. That was really exciting. So we were there during the polar night. And of course, you know, it was dark 24/7. And up until about 12 years or so, it was generally thought that there wasn't much biological activity taking place in the ocean during that time, mainly because there's no sunlight, right? So no sunlight, no photosynthesis, no phytoplankton. And without phytoplankton, the base of the food chain, there really isn't much food in the system for these animals. But by complete coincidence, scientists actually discovered that there is a lot of activity taking place. And so that, of course, raises a ton of questions. And we were there working with some scientists from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution who are looking at zooplankton larvae in particular, a lot of which are actually mollusks, which was fun. And so they're really trying to figure out, okay, well, what are these larvae feeding on? Are they able to settle? Or is there a reason why it might be advantageous for them to, you know, be in the water now rather than hatch during the spring bloom that comes later once the sun returns? And the reason why this is important to understand, not just for science sake, is that the polar regions are changing twice as fast as the rest of the planet when it comes to climate change. And Svalbard is actually the location in the Arctic that is changing the fastest. So for example, the fjord where we were, where the scientists were collecting their samples and where we were filming has an ice over in, I think since 2007, I believe. So they're seeing some pretty drastic changes. And for experts to make good predictions of what to expect in the future, they really need to understand the system and how it works first. So, and then of course, last but most definitely not least, we are doing the program on shelled marine mollusks and the people who study them, which, and that's the reason why I'm here making the presentation today. So why do a show on mollusks? Well, during the pandemic, when we were all on lockdown and couldn't really travel, I found myself, like I'm sure many of you, walking the beaches, collecting seashells. I've always enjoyed collecting seashells. And I noticed that there were a ton of different groups on social media of people who are collecting them and trying to figure out what is what. But it dawned on me that I really didn't know anything about the animals who made the shells and what their lives were like. And so I figured, well, if I don't know, most likely the majority of our audience doesn't know either. So I called Dr. Rudiger Bieler, who we had worked with from the Field Museum, who we had worked with in the past, on an episode on worm snails. And I asked him if it was even possible to film some of these animals, some of the shelled mollusks that we have in Florida in their natural habitat before the shells wash up on the beach. And if there was any science happening at this point, I wasn't sure if, there was even any active science. And it was very exciting to hear that he told me about the NSF project that he started called the Eastern Seaboard Project, which some of you may have heard about in one of the previous lectures from last fall. And or I think it was last summer. But anyway, this is a project where there's been funding made available by NSF to streamline and digitize all of the collection records that a number of museums have in their archives, so that they are more easily searchable online by someone who might want to see, where a species occurs along the Eastern Seaboard and so forth. And this makes available a vast amount of data that wasn't previously available, which is really cool and exciting to see what questions might be able to be asked in the future. As part of filming, of course, Rudiger put us in touch with Dr. Jose Leal, which you can see in the pictures here. This is when we were at the museum last summer filming. It was a couple of weeks before the hurricane hit that we were able to film. And, Jose has been wonderful in also telling us all about how these animals feed and mate and all these kinds of things that will be in the episode, as well as tell us more about the museum and the collection. We also filmed with John Slavsinski at the Florida Museum of Natural History. There'll be a segment at the museum there. And then I'm really excited to say that we're also featuring two citizen scientists who are doing really cool work. One is Dr. Harry Lee, who right now does a lot of work at the museum, actually at the Florida Museum, looking at Florida marine micromollusks, fossilized micromollusks, which was really cool, something I wasn't even aware of existed prior to doing this. So that's a really interesting project. And then we're also featuring Linda Ianello, who's an amazing underwater photographer, very, very skilled, takes beautiful images in black water here in Florida on the coast off of Palm Beach at nighttime when, the zooplankton travels up in the water column. She has photographed a ton of different animals, including mollusks and a lot of mollusk larvae. And she's actually working with scientists to try to get some of these larval forms identified, because not all of these have been described. So I'm really excited to share all that content come June. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we film about 30 to 40 hours worth of stuff. And then when it comes to putting it all together, you know, we always have to cut things, which is very hard. There's, fortunately for us, though, a lot of material that I think is very interesting that didn't fit in the show, but that we can repurpose for our social media channels and on YouTube. So our digital media specialist, Hope Smith, is actually working on a series of short videos showcasing Dr. Leal on the beach in Sanibel and describing some of the different seashells that are common in that area and telling us a little bit more about them. So I thought I'd share with you one of the videos she's put together. We're going to release a series of these in the coming months on our social media channels. So here's a quick look.
Here is one of the stalwarts of Sanibel and the Barrier Islands. It's a Florida fighting conch. They are herbivores. The snails that make the shell, they feed basically on seaweed. And they are very, very responsive. They have very complex eyes, so they can see depth. They have a very fast reaction to predators. So if you try to touch them and if they're alert, they will leap using their foot. They use their foot like a pole vault to kind of somersault and escape. Here, this is not a whole shell. It's the remnants. The reason why I want to show you that is that you can see how the coils of the shell develop. There is a central shaft, and the animal then wraps itself around that, adding more and more to the edge as they grow.
So these are going to be short, fun little videos to reach a whole different audience than our standard audience and tell them more about some of the beautiful seashells that we have here in the state of Florida. Now, our new episodes are going to be released this June. The mollusk program will be released on June 21st, and these dates are for the South Florida market. But what we do is when we first air them on TV, we also put them on our YouTube channel and our website. So starting on those dates is when all 4 episodes, the first 2 on the 21st and the second 2 on the 28th, will be available. And the way you can find them is on YouTube. You find us under @ChangingSeasTV, or like I mentioned earlier, you can go to changingseas.tv, our website. If you follow us on social media, you can, we'll certainly post about the release dates there. Or if you'd like, you can be added to our e-blast list, which is changingseas@southfloridapbs.org. Just shoot us an email and we can add you to the list. And I promise we won't spam anyone. We don't send out that many e-blasts, just if there's events or, new episodes coming out. With that, I want to make sure there's time for questions. So I thank you very much for your time, and yeah, looking forward to what questions you might have.
Thanks, Alexa. Terrific presentation. Thank you very, very much. I know we have a couple questions in the chat. And first of all, I have a question, but before that, I just have to say, I think that's the first and perhaps only time any of us will ever see a pole vaulting fighting conch. And thank you for that. That's something we'll hold close forever. But I have a question. In your travels over the 15 years, you've been all over the world, filming at great depths and in extreme environments. You talked a little bit about your trip to the Arctic, but I guess you've seen a lot. A lot of us, know sort of what we're learning or understanding what we know of our oceans and the changing dynamics with everything is based on articles we read or maybe programs like yours that we watch. But as someone who's out there, I guess I'm wondering what kind of keeps you up at night, based on your experience, having been in all these amazing far-flung systems and environments.
When you mean up at night in terms of issues that we're facing?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
A lot of them, yeah. I think it's very, very disheartening to see that we're still not able to get a grip on, climate change and maybe tackling that as a problem. One thing I've seen that obviously that was an issue when we started the program, and I've done a few fellowships for journalists where for example, back in 2006, I think it was, I was at Woods Hole during a special fellowship where there was an in-depth panel of climate change experts who all said, if we don't make changes now, it's irreversible. And, they weren't the first, obviously, at that time. And, here we are still 15 years later, and we haven't really made any significant changes. But what I've seen that's disheartening, I think, that we didn't see in the early years is we've now interviewed some experts, and scientists obviously are always very conscientious about being objective and not letting their personal feelings get involved or whatever. But we've interviewed a few scientists now that have actually cried on camera because they've been working on a species or an ecosystem, and that they're seeing just kind of disappear in front of their eyes. And it's kind of like, they get the information out there, but nothing changes. So that's really, heartbreaking to see. There are also definitely hopeful stories out there, and sure, with climate change, there's going to be winners and losers. But there are times when that's kind of disheartening. Also topics of sort of just, I feel a lot of times it comes down to just there are just too many of us on the planet, right? With population booming the way it does, and we've done some shows on aquaculture and such. And when you think about, okay, well, ocean resources are limited, but we need to feed billions of people, and how can we do that in a way that works without further harming the planet? And those kinds of things are can keep you up at night. But I think the overarching issue is probably because it's probably climate change, just because you have these experts who are doing amazing work, for example, with coral reef restoration, lots of tremendous efforts, right? But you can only do so much if the CO2 in the atmosphere doesn't go down, and oceans keep acidifying, and sea levels keep rising, and that can only do so much. So I guess, that's right. It can be disheartening, but I try to look at the positive. There is, some good stuff too. So
well, what's before we get to the other question, what's an example of some of the hopeful or positive kind of projects or signs that you've seen?
So I think just anything that's really about exploration, right? Like what I mentioned about the polar night research, that's an entire field of ecology that didn't exist, to my understanding, like 15 years ago, right? And they're learning so much, and it's just always blows my mind just how much there is still to learn about our planet, and things that are happening, right? We also have done a few episodes on humpback whales. And so, for example, in particular, the population of humpback whales that travels between Hawaii and Alaska. And that's kind of a success story. That population has been taken off the endangered species list. So even though there was a little bit of a scare a few years ago when their numbers suddenly dropped in relation to the blob that was happening off the Pacific. But overall, that's a hopeful story. So there's definitely hopeful stories there. It's just, I guess, I think a lot of it has also shifted from just saying, predicting what will happen, to people actively working on, okay, what can we do to, limit local impacts wherever we are,
Right. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
I don't know if that answers your question. I hope I didn't.
No, absolutely. Completely answers the question. And let's look at a couple of the questions in chat. Okay. Anna asks, have you filmed on the subject of deep sea mining impacts?
No, but that's a very, very important and good topic. It is actually something I have tried to see if we could do a few years back, actually right before the pandemic when I reached out to some scientists who do research on the impacts of deep sea mining and who study deep sea coral reefs in certain parts of the globe. But no, that's something I would like to do. I think that's a very important topic, but we haven't done it yet. It's not always so easy to get, really to tell that story. We would have to join a science team at sea as they're exploring some unique deep sea habitat, right? And getting space on research vessels can be challenging because that space is always limited. So it's kind of getting lucky and being able to squeeze one of our crews onto a ship.
Yep. A question also from Anna. What do you think about deep sea marine uncrewed robotics developments for research and sea industries?
I actually can't say that I know anything about it, so I can't answer that question, I'm afraid, but it sounds interesting. I guess it all depends on how it would be used, right? But one thing that's not the same, but maybe similar that seems to really been informing science a lot lately is a lot of these, different buoys and such that record all kinds of data remotely that is, wasn't available 20, 30 years ago. That's really, providing a lot of information in far and remote locations where previously you would have to go with a ship. So if this is along those lines, then it sounds like it could be very useful potentially.
Yep. Helen has a question. Which countries or states appear to be on the front line to mitigate the effects of climate change on shore and ocean life?
Well, definitely sounds like, again, it was my colleague Liz who produced this episode, but it sounds like Bermuda is definitely one of those countries. We actually were filming in Bermuda, I think it's like 6 years ago now, because what's really unique about Bermuda is that they're home to one of the longtime time series. So we worked with a professor from the University of Miami who studies the carbon cycle, and they have been recording data on different parameters in the oceans, I believe, since the 1980s. And they go out once a month, they keep collecting the same data so they can really see how acidification has increased, how CO2 levels have increased. It's just one of these time series that I think they're like 10 or so stations approximately in the world in different places across the planet that are recording these kinds of data. And that's the data that's being used for, by the United Nations when they're making decisions on climate change. So Bermuda is kind of known for that, right? They're hosts to that, but that is, of course, like more of a global perspective, and it doesn't really fix their local problems. But based on the things that my colleague Liz was able to film, it looks like they're doing a lot of things locally to kind of, stem the tide, so to speak. It's really interesting because if you think of Bermuda, it's like it was this place where for centuries, right, it was feared by mariners because so many ships would run aground on their coral reefs. And now they're realizing how important that is as a barrier, since they're in the middle of the deep ocean, to keep these big ocean swells from, just flooding them. And I think they're looking at, from what I understand, like possibly using maybe restoration efforts instead of man-made things such as seawalls and stuff to like maybe have restored reefs that could take that place, that don't need to be replaced every so many years. But yeah, that's the first thing that comes to mind. I'm sure there are other areas as well.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting example. We have a mollusk question, and for this, Jose, I think you're still here. I'm going to turn on, if you can hear me, Jose, I'm going to turn on your mic here. And
hi, Jose.
Hi, Jose. I see he's unmuted. And the question is from Kiefer, I think, if I'm reading this correctly. What is the longest living mollusk, I guess, in the collection at the Bailey Matthews Museum?
We do have empty shells, which is what's left of a living mollusk of a species called the ocean quahog. And they are known to live in excess of 500 years. And curiously enough, they are a commercial species. So a lot of people have eaten clams that are older than 500 years without knowing. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but as far as the the aquarium, when the aquariums were functional, and they will be functional again, sooner than later, we have some of the local species that can live up to 20, 25 years of life. Curiously enough, again, number two, the horse conch, which is the largest species actually of shelled mollusk in the Atlantic Ocean, doesn't get to live too long. The world record size horse conch we have in the museum was estimated to have lived 16 years only. So
yeah, and that's information that just became more clearly understood really within the last 6 months or so, right, Jose? As far as
with Dr. Greg Herberts in his paper on dating horse conch shells.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Jose.
Thank you.
And thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Kiefer, for the question.
And I have to add that Jose has been thank you so much, Jose. You've been such a tremendous wealth of knowledge and information as we've worked on this program. We couldn't have done this without you, because I know I've peppered you with questions for months, and all the guidance you're providing as well to Norman, our animator, as he's trying to illustrate some of these processes. I feel like I've learned so much. It's been tremendous fun to learn from you. So thank you for that.
Thank you, and thanks for including mollusks in your series.
Yeah. Hey, it was long overdue, and glad we're doing it.
Yeah, bravo. And but I mean, of course, it's not very often that we're all having the opportunity to work on programs like yours. But what you just said about Jose as far as working within a resource, we hear it, and anybody who comes in contact with him, we hear it. So that's wonderful. Well, thank you very, very much, Alexa. Thank you, everyone, for joining the program and for your questions. And this was terrific. And tune into our next programs. We'll be announcing a summer series shortly. And but if you've got interest in the April and May programs, please register for those. And thanks for your interest in the museum, and thanks for your support of the museum. And Alexa, thanks for all your work that you do to bring greater awareness to the interesting things and the challenging issues and the marvels of our oceans. So thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Thanks for having me. It's been great fun.
Okay. All right. Good night.
Bye.